The crystal wine glasses caught the dining room light as I sat across from the woman who had vanished from our lives 2 decades ago. Grandmother Patricia adjusted her pearl necklace, studying me with those familiar green eyes that once read me bedtime stories. Her sudden question sliced through the pleasant dinner conversation like a blade through silk. Dolores, honey, why are you living in that cramped apartment downtown? What happened to the beautiful Victorian house we gave you for your 18th birthday? Before I could form words to explain the painful truth that had haunted me for 20 years, my parents exchanged knowing glances. Mother's lipstick-stained smile widened as she delivered the crushing blow. Oh, that house now belongs to Jake, our younger son. Grandmother's expression shifted, a mysterious smile spreading across her weathered face as she whispered, "Open the door and you'll see everything." The memory crashed over me like a tidal wave, pulling me back to that magical September morning when I turned 18. Grandmother Patricia had presented me with antique brass keys tied with a velvet ribbon, her hands trembling with excitement as she pressed the deed into my palms. The Victorian house on Maple Street stood like a fairy tale cottage, complete with its wraparound porch painted in soft yellow climbing roses that perfumed the evening air, and 3 spacious bedrooms that promised independence and possibility. I had spent countless hours that autumn decorating my first real home, hanging curtains I'd sewn myself and arranging furniture from garage sales. The hardwood floors gleamed under afternoon sunlight streaming through bay windows, and I'd planted tulip bulbs in the garden, dreaming of the spring blooms that would welcome me home from my first year of college. Every corner of that house represented freedom from my parents' suffocating control, a sanctuary where I could finally become the woman I was meant to be. Then came the phone call that shattered everything. 2 weeks after my birthday celebration, Father had summoned me to his office with that stern voice I'd learned to dread since childhood. His massive oak desk seemed to swallow him as he explained the temporary family financial emergency that required me to return the house immediately. Mother stood behind his chair, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, insisting this sacrifice was just until things stabilized, and promising the house would be mine again within 6 months. "We'll handle all the paperwork, sweetheart," Mother had cooed, her manicured fingers already reaching for the deed. "You're too young to understand these complicated legal matters. Trust us to protect your inheritance until you're ready for such enormous responsibility." Her words dripped with false sweetness that made my stomach turn. But at 18, I believed parents always acted in their children's best interests. Now, 20 years later, I found myself explaining this betrayal to the grandmother who'd been absent for my entire adult life. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his expensive suit a stark contrast to my discount department store dress. His wife Sarah listened with growing concern, her hand instinctively moving to cover her mouth as the magnitude of my family's deception became clear. "We invested wisely in that property," Father announced, cutting his steak with deliberate precision. "The house needed proper maintenance, structural improvements that a college student couldn't possibly afford or manage. We've been excellent stewards of your grandmother's generous gift." His words carried the same patronizing tone that had silenced my protests 2 decades earlier. Mother nodded enthusiastically, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light. "Jake has taken such wonderful care of the place, dear. He's added a master suite, renovated the kitchen with granite countertops, and landscaped the entire backyard. The property value has tripled under his responsible ownership." She spoke as if this somehow justified stealing my inheritance, her voice carrying that familiar note of moral superiority that had always made me feel small and ungrateful. Jake finally broke his silence, his voice barely audible above the clinking of silverware against china. "Dolores, I always meant to talk to you about this. I know it wasn't fair, but Mom and Dad convinced me that you'd signed the transfer papers willingly. They said you wanted me to have the house because you preferred city living." His admission hung in the air like smoke, confirming what I'd suspected but never dared voice. Grandmother Patricia had remained silent throughout this painful recollection, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the white tablecloth. Her calm demeanor unsettled me more than shouting would have. When the conversation finally lulled, she reached beneath her chair and produced an old leather briefcase, its brass clasps gleaming like the keys she'd given me so long ago. The briefcase landed on the table with a soft thud that somehow echoed louder than thunder. Patricia's weathered hands opened the clasps with ceremonial precision, revealing neat stacks of documents, bank statements, and something wrapped in tissue paper. The sight of those papers made Father's face drain of color and Mother's fork clatter against her plate. "I never actually left town 20 years ago," Grandmother announced, her voice steady as granite. "I've been watching everything unfold from my apartment in Eleanor's basement. Every single day I've been documenting what this family has done to my granddaughter." The words hit the dining room like a bomb blast, shattering the pretense of a normal family gathering and revealing the ugly truth that had been festering beneath our surface civility for 2 decades. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap as Grandmother Patricia began laying photographs across the mahogany table. Each image told a story of deception that cut deeper than any blade. There was Jake moving boxes into my house just 3 months after I'd been forced to surrender it. There were pictures of expensive renovation vehicles parked in the driveway I'd once swept clean each morning before classes. "Eleanor Henderson has been my closest friend since we were 12 years old," Patricia explained, her voice carrying the weight of careful planning. "When your parents told everyone I'd moved to Florida to escape the harsh Pennsylvania winters, Eleanor and I decided to let them believe that lie. Her basement apartment gave me the perfect vantage point to observe your family's true nature." She spread bank records across the table like playing cards, revealing a losing hand. The documents showed monthly rental payments flowing into an account bearing my parents' names, money that should have been building my own financial foundation while I struggled through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. 20 years of equity growth had vanished into their pockets while I'd eaten ramen noodles and shared cramped dormitory rooms with strangers. 240 months of rental income, Patricia announced, her finger tracing the endless columns of numbers. "That's $68,000 in today's money, not counting the property appreciation that now makes this house worth $400,000 instead of the $140,000 it was worth when I gave it to Dolores." Her mathematical precision turned my stolen inheritance into stark reality. I felt bile rising in my throat as the scope of their betrayal became clear. Those business trips my parents had taken throughout my college years, the new cars they'd purchased every few years, the expensive dinners they'd enjoyed while I'd worked double shifts at the campus bookstore. All of it funded by my grandmother's gift that they'd stolen through manipulation and false promises. Jake's face had turned ashen, his expensive watch catching the light as his hands shook. "I had no idea about the rental income," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "They told me the house was sitting empty, that they were paying property taxes and maintenance out of their own pockets as a favor to Dolores until she finished school." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze my hand, her wedding ring cool against my skin. "This is horrific," she breathed, her usual composed demeanor cracking. "Jake, how could you not question why your parents suddenly decided you deserved a house when Dolores was the one Grandma specifically chose to receive it?" Father's jaw clenched as he attempted to regain control of the narrative. "We protected that property from a teenager's poor judgment. College students are notorious for damaging rental properties, throwing parties, neglecting maintenance. We preserved the value of your grandmother's investment through responsible adult supervision." Mother's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "Honestly, Patricia, you're making us sound like criminals when we've been nothing but responsible caretakers. Dolores has thrived in her downtown apartment building her career without the burden of property ownership. We did her a favor by removing that stress from her young shoulders. Why, Saints, so Their justifications sounded exactly like the gaslighting that had confused and silenced me for 2 decades. But now, with Patricia's evidence spread before us like an autopsy report, their words rang hollow and desperate. The photographs showed them celebrating at expensive restaurants on the same nights I'd called home crying about unpaid bills and scholarship rejections. Patricia's next revelation hit like lightning, striking twice in the same spot. She produced a small tape recorder from her purse, its silver surface reflecting the chandelier's glow. "I wasn't just watching," she announced, her thumb hovering over the play button. "I was also listening." The device clicked, and suddenly the room filled with voices from the past. My parents' younger selves discussing their plan to manipulate the house, transfer their laughter echoing as they mocked their stupid daughter, who would never question their authority. Mother's voice 2 decades younger, but equally cold, suggesting they forge my signature on transfer documents to make the theft appear legal. "She'll never know the difference," came Father's voice through the crackling speaker. "Patricia will be long gone, and Dolores trusts us completely. We can create whatever story we need about financial emergencies and family obligations. The girl is too naive to challenge adult decisions." The recording continued, revealing their discussion of creating fake loan documents using the house as collateral, their plan to establish a rental company to legitimize collecting income, and their strategy for keeping me ignorant of property taxes and maintenance issues that would have revealed their deception. Jake pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against hardwood floors. "Dear God," he moaned, burying it all in his face in his hands. "I've been living in a house built on lies for 20 years. My children have grown up in a home that was stolen from their aunt." His shoulders shook with the weight of this revelation, his successful businessman facade crumbling like ancient plaster. But Patricia wasn't finished with her revelations. Her knowing smile deepened as she reached for the tissue-wrapped package, her fingers working at the delicate paper with the patience of someone who'd waited decades for this moment. Whatever lay within those folds would clearly deliver the final devastating blow to my parents' house of lies. The tissue paper fell away like autumn leaves, revealing not just the original brass keys I remembered from my 18th birthday, but a second document that made my mother gasp audibly. The paper was yellowed with age, bearing official seals and signatures that looked far more authentic than anything I'd seen during that traumatic transfer 20 years ago. "This is the real deed," Patricia announced, her voice carrying the authority of absolute truth. "The one that shows the house was bequeathed equally to both my grandchildren, not just to Dolores alone." Her finger traced the legal language that spelled out joint ownership between Jake and me, a provision that had somehow been concealed during the original gift presentation. Father's face transformed from confident denial to genuine panic. "Then that's impossible," he sputtered, reaching for the document with trembling hands. "You specifically told us the house was Dolores's 18th birthday present. There was never any mention of shared ownership or Jake's inheritance rights. Why is sign sin?" Patricia's laugh held no warmth, only the bitter satisfaction of someone finally revealing a carefully guarded secret. "I told you the house was for Dolores's 18th birthday because I wanted to see how your family would handle generosity and responsibility. I never said Jake wouldn't receive his equal share when the time came. You convinced me to sign papers transferring my portion illegally, but I kept copies of everything and never filed the actual transfer documents with the county clerk." And sign. The implications crashed over us like successive waves battering a shoreline. Not only had my parents stolen my inheritance, but they'd also cheated Jake out of his legitimate half-ownership by manipulating both of us through carefully constructed lies. The house legally belonged to both of us, making their 20-year deception even more elaborate and cruel than I'd imagined. Sarah leaned forward, her professional background in accounting evident as she studied the financial documents Patricia continued producing from her briefcase. "These bank statements show systematic wire fraud." She announced, her voice tight with controlled anger. They've been using Dolores' social security number to claim tax benefits she never received, routing property tax payments through fake accounts and diverting mail to prevent her from knowing about maintenance issues or appreciation in property value. The evidence painted a picture of financial manipulation so thorough it qualified as organized crime. My parents hadn't simply taken advantage of a confused teenager. They'd constructed an entire infrastructure of deception designed to steal from both their children while maintaining the appearance of loving family caregivers. Jake's confession came in broken sentences punctuated by shame and regret. 5 years ago, I found some of these documents in Dad's home office. When I confronted them about the questionable ownership transfer, they threatened to write me out of their will entirely and destroy my business reputation in the community. They said Dolores had moved on with her life and bringing up old issues would only hurt everyone unnecessarily. His admission explained the guilt I'd sensed during family gatherings over the past few years. The way he'd avoided discussing the house or his home improvements when I visited. Mother and father had trapped him in their conspiracy through threats and manipulation, making him complicit in my continued exploitation while tormenting him with knowledge of the injustice. I started recording our conversations after that. Jake continued, producing his own small device from his jacket pocket. I couldn't bring myself to betray them outright, but I knew someday the truth would have to come out. I've been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the courage to do what's right. The weight of shared guilt and mutual victimization hung between us like fog, obscuring the clean lines of family loyalty I'd believed in since childhood. We'd all been pawns in our parents' elaborate game, manipulated through love, fear, and false promises into enabling their criminal behavior. Patricia's final revelation shattered even this complicated understanding. She unwrapped another document from the briefcase, this one bearing letterhead from the law offices of Thompson and Associates. Marcus Thompson has been my attorney for 15 years. She announced, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a chess player revealing checkmate. He's been building a case against your parents since the day I realized their financial emergency was actually carefully planned theft. The legal papers documented everything. The forged signatures, the fake emergency loan documents, the establishment of fraudulent rental companies, and the systematic identity theft that had damaged my credit score for decades. But Marcus Thompson wasn't just another attorney building another case. Marcus is my son from my first marriage, Patricia continued, her green eyes sparkling with long, suppressed triumph. The son your parents never knew existed because I gave him up for adoption 45 years ago. When he found me through genealogy research, we discovered that Robert and Martha had stolen from his half-niece. He's been investigating this case personally, and tomorrow morning, federal agents will serve search warrants on your home, your business, and all your financial accounts. The dining room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock and Mother's sharp intake of breath. 20 years of careful planning had led to this moment when Grandmother Patricia would finally deliver justice for the granddaughter she'd loved enough to sacrifice 2 decades of open family relationships to protect. Father's confident facade finally crumbled completely. "You vindictive old woman," he hissed, his mask slipping to reveal the cruelty that had always lurked beneath his paternal authority. "You've destroyed this family over a simple misunderstanding about property transfer. We've been generous parents and grandparents, and this is how you repay our kindness." But Patricia's knowing smile only deepened. Tomorrow would bring consequences they'd managed to avoid for 20 years, and the federal investigation would reveal layers of deception that extended far beyond one stolen house and 2 manipulated grandchildren. Dawn arrived with the sound of vehicles crunching across our parents' circular driveway. Through the dining room window, I watched federal agents in Navy windbreakers emerge from black SUVs, their movements precise and purposeful as they approached the house where I'd spent my childhood believing in the fundamental goodness of family love. FBI agent Jennifer Walsh introduced herself with professional courtesy that couldn't disguise the serious nature of her investigation. Her partner, Agent David Chen, carried boxes of evidence bags and electronic equipment designed to uncover digital trails of financial fraud. The search warrant he presented covered every aspect of my parents' lives: their home, their business offices, their computers, and all banking records dating back 25 years. This investigation began as a civil matter regarding property transfer irregularities, Agent Walsh explained, as her team spread through the house with methodical efficiency. However, our preliminary review of documents provided by Mrs. Patricia Thompson suggests a pattern of federal crimes, including wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, and organized financial conspiracy. The formal language transformed our family tragedy into something larger and more frightening than personal betrayal. Federal crimes carried prison sentences measured in decades, not the slap-on-the-wrist consequences I'd imagined might someday befall my parents' questionable financial decisions. Jake had volunteered to open every room of the Victorian house to investigators, his guilt over 20 years of unwitting complicity driving him to complete transparency. Agent Chen's team discovered a hidden safe behind a false wall in the basement, its contents revealing the true scope of my parents' criminal enterprise. The safe contained original documents proving they'd committed similar fraud against father's deceased brother, Uncle Timothy, whose farmland had been temporarily transferred during his cancer treatment and never returned to his children. Bank records showed a pattern of property manipulation affecting 7 different families over 2 decades, each theft justified through manufactured emergencies and family loyalty appeals. Mother's gambling addiction became apparent through casino receipts and debt payment records hidden within the safe's depths. Her frequent trips to Atlantic City hadn't been ladies' shopping excursions, but desperate attempts to recover money lost through compulsive betting on everything from slot machines to horse racing. My stolen rental income had funded her addiction while she portrayed herself as a devoted mother sacrificing for her family's welfare. Father's business, Thompson Construction, had been propped up through illegal real estate transfers for 15 years. Client deposits had been diverted to cover operational expenses, with stolen property equity serving as collateral for loans he never intended to repay through legitimate earnings. The FBI's forensic accounting revealed a web of financial deception that made their theft of my inheritance appear almost minor by comparison. "Your parents haven't just stolen from family members," Agent Walsh informed me as we stood in my childhood bedroom, now converted into a home office filled with incriminating documents. "We've identified at least 12 other victims in the surrounding counties, mostly elderly property owners who trusted your father's construction company with major renovations and property transfers. The community impact of their crimes extended far beyond our family's broken trust. Local bank employees admitted to Agent Chen that they'd been uncomfortable with numerous transactions over the years, but had trusted the Thompson family's reputation for honesty and community involvement. Multiple neighbors revealed years of suspicious activity around various properties, stories they'd never reported because they'd assumed legitimate business explanations. Jake's children learned that their college funds had been built through criminal activity, a revelation that sent 15-year-old Emma into tears and prompted 17-year-old Michael to demand they return every penny to the rightful owners. Sarah's accounting expertise proved invaluable as she helped federal agents trace money flows through the maze of shell companies and fraudulent accounts their grandparents had created. The house inspection revealed renovations funded entirely through stolen money. The granite countertops mother had praised, the master suite addition Jake had enjoyed, the professional landscaping that had tripled the property value. All of it had been purchased with funds stolen from multiple victims over 2 decades. Even the furniture and artwork that filled the rooms represented criminal proceeds that would need to be returned or forfeited to victim compensation funds. But Agent Walsh's most devastating revelation came when she opened her laptop to show us a map displaying the full scope of the investigation. Red pins marked properties across 3 states where similar fraud patterns had been identified, suggesting my parents' criminal network extended far beyond our small Pennsylvania community. We believe your parents are part of a larger organized crime ring specializing in real estate fraud targeting families and elderly property owners, she explained, zooming in on clusters of pins around major metropolitan areas. The sophistication of their documentation forgery and the coordination with other criminal organizations suggests this isn't amateur hour family theft. These are federal racketeering charges. And, my show. The word racketeering hit me like a physical blow. My parents weren't just greedy opportunists who'd taken advantage of family trust. They were professional criminals whose theft of my inheritance had been part of a multi-state conspiracy that had destroyed dozens of lives over the course of 2 decades. That evening, as federal agents concluded their initial search and seizure operations, Patricia revealed one final piece of information that recontextualized everything we thought we knew about our family's criminal behavior. She wasn't just my father's mother-in-law seeking justice for a beloved granddaughter. The truth was far more complex and heartbreaking than anything we'd imagined. Agent Walsh's laptop screen glowed in the lamplight as she showed us the photograph that would unravel the last threads of my family's fabricated history. The black and white image, dated 47 years ago, showed a young woman standing in front of a modest farmhouse, her arms wrapped protectively around a toddler with familiar green eyes. This is Patricia Williams in 1977. Agent Walsh explained, her voice gentle but professionally detached. She was 22 years old when her 3-year-old daughter was taken from a grocery store parking lot in Scranton. The child was never found despite one of the largest search efforts in Pennsylvania history. The photograph's implications crashed over me like an avalanche. The toddler in Patricia's arms wore a little yellow dress and had the same stubborn cowlick that had always made mother's hair difficult to style. The resemblance was unmistakable, undeniable, and absolutely devastating. Martha was kidnapped as a child, I whispered, my voice barely audible above the grandfather clock's steady ticking. The woman I'd called mother, who had stolen my inheritance and manipulated our family for decades, was herself a victim of an even more horrible crime that had destroyed her original identity. Patricia's eyes filled with tears she'd apparently been holding back for nearly half a century. I spent 45 years searching for my daughter, she said, her voice cracking with the weight of suppressed grief. When I finally found her through DNA testing last year, I discovered she'd become the very type of person who had destroyed my life decades earlier. The cruel irony was almost too painful to comprehend. Martha's childhood trauma of being stolen from her biological family had somehow transformed her into someone who specialized in stealing from other families. The cycle of victimization had perpetuated itself through generations, creating new victims, while the original victim became the perpetrator. The people who took me called themselves my parents, Mother said from the doorway, her voice hollow and distant. She'd been standing there listening, her designer clothes wrinkled and her perfect makeup streaked with tears. They told me my real parents had died in a car accident, that they'd adopted me through a private agency that no longer existed. Father appeared behind her, no longer the confident patriarch, but a broken man whose criminal empire was collapsing around him. We discovered the truth about Martha's background 15 years ago, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. When her adoptive parents died and left her their estate, we found documents suggesting she'd been kidnapped as a child. The revelation explained so much about Mother's psychological makeup, her need to control and manipulate, her desperate attempts to create security through financial accumulation. She'd spent her adult life unconsciously recreating the trauma of having everything stolen from her, but instead of healing from her victimization, she'd become the victimizer. Why didn't you contact me when you learned the truth? Won't. Patricia asked her question, carrying decades of suppressed longing. I never stopped looking for you, never stopped hoping you were alive somewhere building a family of your own. Mother's laugh was bitter and broken, because by then we'd already stolen from so many people that I was terrified you'd turn us in to the authorities. I thought it was better to let you believe I was dead than to have you discover what I'd become. Her confession revealed the psychological prison she'd built around herself, where shame and fear had prevented the reunion both women had unknowingly craved. The FBI's investigation had uncovered this family secret through routine background checks that revealed discrepancies in Mother's early documentation. Birth certificates that didn't match Social Security records, adoption papers from agencies that had never existed, and medical records that suggested childhood trauma consistent with kidnapping and psychological manipulation. Jake slumped into a dining room chair, his face pale with the enormity of these revelations. So Grandma Patricia is actually our real grandmother, not just Dad's mother-in-law, he said slowly, working through the implications. And Mom has been unconsciously repeating the trauma of her own kidnapping by stealing from other families. Sarah reached for my hand across the table, her wedding ring catching the lamplight as our fingers intertwined. This explains so much about the family dynamics, the secrecy, the manipulation, she whispered. Your mother was trying to create the security she lost as a child, but she was doing it through the very methods that had victimized her originally. Agent Chen closed his laptop and gathered the scattered documents that had transformed our dining room into an evidence processing center. The psychological profile fits what we see in many adult victims of childhood trauma, he explained. The need for control, the financial hoarding, the manipulation of family relationships. Unfortunately, trauma doesn't excuse criminal behavior, especially when it's been sustained over multiple decades and affected so many victims. But Patricia's story wasn't finished. She reached into her briefcase one more time, producing a leather journal worn smooth by decades of handling. I wrote to you every day for 47 years. She told Mother, opening the journal to reveal page after page of careful handwriting. Mine, letters I never sent because I didn't know where you were, but I needed to keep talking to you somehow. The journal entries chronicled a mother's love that had never diminished, despite decades of separation. Birthday wishes, holiday memories, advice about relationships and careers, hopes and dreams for a daughter who might be anywhere in the world. Each page represented a day when Patricia had chosen hope over despair, love over bitterness, faith over cynicism. I gave Dolores that house because she reminded me so much of you at that age, Patricia continued, her voice strengthening with resolve. Brave, independent, full of dreams about the future. When your family stole it from her, I knew I had to choose between protecting my granddaughter and protecting the daughter I'd just found. The choice she'd made was evident in the federal agents preparing to arrest my parents, the evidence that would send them to prison for decades, and the justice that would finally be served after 20 years of patient investigation. She'd chosen the granddaughter, who needed protection, over the daughter who'd become the predator. Tomorrow would bring arraignments and bail hearings, asset forfeiture proceedings, and victim impact statements. But tonight in this dining room, where the truth had finally emerged after decades of lies, 3 generations of women sat together acknowledging the cycles of trauma and healing that had shaped our family's destiny. The house on Maple Street had been more than my inheritance. It had been Patricia's gift to the granddaughter who represented everything she'd hoped her kidnapped daughter might become. Now it would symbolize something different, the possibility that love could triumph over trauma, that justice could emerge from patience, and that families could rebuild themselves around truth rather than the lies that had nearly destroyed us all. The courthouse steps were slick with November rain as I climbed toward the federal building where my parents would face the consequences of their 20-year criminal enterprise. Media vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward gray clouds while reporters rehearsed the story that had captured regional attention: a local family's real estate fraud that had victimized dozens of people across 3 states. Inside the courtroom, federal prosecutor Amanda Richardson outlined charges that seemed to multiply with each paragraph of the indictment: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, money laundering, racketeering under the RICO Act. Each charge carried potential sentences measured in decades, not the minor penalties I'd once imagined might someday address my parents' questionable financial decisions. The defendants operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise for over 2 decades, Prosecutor Richardson announced to the packed courtroom. They targeted vulnerable families, elderly property owners, and their own relatives through carefully constructed schemes designed to illegally transfer real estate and divert financial assets. The scope of their crimes extends across state lines and affected at least 37 identified victims. Fine boats. Father sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his confident businessman persona replaced by the hollow stare of someone watching his entire life collapse. Mother appeared smaller somehow, her designer clothes exchanged for standard-issue clothing that made her look older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Their attorney, Dennis Kellerman, attempted to portray them as loving parents who'd made unfortunate financial decisions during difficult economic circumstances. But federal evidence made such characterizations impossible to sustain. The prosecution's case was built on document trails, recorded conversations, and witness testimony that painted a clear picture of organized criminal activity. Jake testified first, his voice steady despite the obvious emotional toll of betraying the parents who'd raised him. He described discovering the truth about my stolen inheritance, the threats they'd made when he'd questioned their actions, and the pattern of manipulation that had characterized his entire adult relationship with them. They told me Dolores had willingly signed over the house because she preferred city living, he said, looking directly at the jury. When I found evidence proving they'd forged her signature, they threatened to destroy my business and cut me out of their will if I revealed the truth to anyone. Sarah followed with testimony about the financial records she'd helped federal agents analyze her accounting expertise, providing clear explanations of money flows that revealed systematic theft and fraud. Her professional credibility gave weight to evidence that might have seemed too complex for average citizens to understand. The rental income from Dolores's house was laundered through 7 different shell companies, she explained, pointing to exhibits that showed the money trail. Each transfer was designed to obscure the original source and make the funds appear to be legitimate business income rather than proceeds from stolen property. But the most powerful testimony came from other victims, whose stories echoed mine in heartbreaking variations. Elderly couples who'd lost family farms through manufactured emergencies, young families who'd been cheated out of inherited properties through forged documents, widows who'd trusted father's construction company with home renovations that became pretexts for property theft. Margaret Hensley, 78 years old, described how my parents had convinced her to sign temporary transfer papers for her late husband's workshop, promising the building would be returned after they completed foundation repairs. She died 5 years ago, still believing the workshop would eventually be returned to her grandchildren, never learning that it had been sold to fund mother's gambling addiction. Thomas Bradford testified about the family restaurant his grandfather had built stolen through fake loan documents when his father developed cancer and needed money for experimental treatments. The building had been torn down to construct a strip mall, erasing 4 generations of family history while enriching my parents through fraudulent property development deals. Each victim impact statement revealed the human cost of crimes that extended far beyond financial theft. Families had been torn apart by suspicious and legal battles. Children had grown up believing their parents were irresponsible or unlucky, never knowing their inheritances had been stolen through criminal conspiracy. Trust in community institutions had been shattered when people discovered that respected business leaders were actually predators who specialized in exploiting family loyalty and generational love. Patricia's testimony provided the emotional climax of the trial. She described 47 years of searching for her kidnapped daughter, the joy of finally finding Martha through DNA testing, and the devastating discovery that her own child had become a criminal who specialized in stealing from families. I gave my granddaughter that house because I wanted her to have the security and independence that my daughter never experienced, Patricia said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. When I learned that Martha and Robert had stolen it, I faced an impossible choice between protecting the daughter I'd lost and the granddaughter who needed justice. The defense team's strategy of portraying my parents as victims of circumstances beyond their control crumbled under the weight of evidence showing careful planning, sophisticated execution, and complete lack of remorse. Recorded conversations revealed them laughing about their stupid victims who trusted family members and authority figures. Bank records showed them celebrating successful thefts with expensive vacations and luxury purchases. Judge Catherine Morrison delivered the sentences on a cold December morning that felt like justice finally arriving after decades of delay. Father received 22 years in federal prison plus full restitution to identified victims. Mother received 18 years plus mandatory psychological counseling to address the trauma that had contributed to her criminal behavior. These crimes represent a betrayal of the most fundamental human bonds, Judge Morrison announced as she imposed the sentences. The defendants exploited family love, community trust, and institutional respect to steal from people who had every reason to believe they were dealing with honest, caring relatives and neighbors. The asset forfeiture orders returned every penny that could be traced, plus additional compensation from the seizure of properties purchased with criminal proceeds. The Victorian house on Maple Street would finally become mine legally and completely, along with 20 years of rental income that would transform my financial future from struggle to genuine security. But beyond the legal victories and financial restitution, the trial had accomplished something more valuable than money could measure. It had revealed the truth about our family's history, broken the cycles of deception that had poisoned relationships for decades, and created the possibility for healing based on honesty rather than the lies that had nearly destroyed us all. As we left the courthouse that final day, Patricia took my arm with the gentle strength of someone who'd waited 47 years to reclaim her family. The rain had stopped, and winter sunlight filtered through clouds to illuminate the path toward whatever future we would build together, one conversation and one day at a time. 6 months after the sentencing, I stood in the kitchen of my Victorian house watching Patricia teach Jake's children how to make her famous apple pie from a recipe that had been passed down through generations before trauma and crime had nearly erased our family's authentic traditions. The afternoon sunlight streaming through bay windows caught the flour dust dancing in the air as Emma learned to roll pastry dough, and Michael discovered that cooking required patience as much as technique. The house had been transformed yet again, but this time the changes represented healing rather than theft. We'd removed the additions funded by criminal proceeds, restoring the original 3-bedroom layout that Patricia had envisioned when she'd given me the keys 2 decades earlier. The granite countertops had been replaced with simple butcher block that invited family gathering rather than displaying stolen wealth. Federal restitution funds had enabled me to leave my corporate job and establish the Family Property Protection Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of real estate fraud navigate the complex legal system that had nearly failed to protect my own rights. The foundation's offices occupied the house's former master suite, creating a workspace where I could transform my painful experience into meaningful advocacy for other victims. Patricia had moved into the guest bedroom permanently, Her presence, filling the house with stories about our family's history before tragedy, had twisted love into manipulation and security into criminal conspiracy. She taught me how to tend the garden where my tulips had finally bloomed after 20 years of waiting. Their bright yellow faces turned toward spring sunshine like hope emerging from long winter darkness. Jake and Sarah had purchased a smaller house 6 blocks away, close enough for daily visits, but far enough to establish their own family identity separate from the crimes that had funded their previous lifestyle. Their children spent weekends helping Patricia preserve family recipes and learning about their great-grandmother's courage in surviving 47 years of separation from her stolen daughter. The Foundation's first major victory came when we helped Margaret Hensley's grandchildren recover their grandfather's workshop through a civil lawsuit against the developers who'd purchased the building knowing it had been fraudulently obtained. The legal precedent established by their case would benefit dozens of other families seeking justice for similar crimes committed by organized real estate fraud rings. My relationship with Marcus Thompson had evolved from professional attorney-client interactions into something deeper and more personal. As Patricia's son and my legal advocate, he understood the complex family dynamics that had shaped our unusual circumstances. Our shared commitment to justice and healing created a foundation for love that was built on truth rather than the deceptions that had characterized my parents' marriage. "You've given me something I never thought I'd find," I told Patricia one evening as we sat on the wraparound porch watching fireflies dance above the garden where new roses climbed toward summer stars. A family based on honesty instead of manipulation, love instead of control, sharing instead of taking. Her smile carried the wisdom of someone who'd learned that patience and hope could triumph over the cruelest circumstances. "You gave me something too," she replied, her hand covering mine with the gentle strength that had sustained her through nearly 50 years of searching. "You gave me proof that love can survive anything, even when it seems lost forever." The Foundation's work expanded to include educational programs for young adults about property rights and financial protection, partnerships with law enforcement agencies investigating similar fraud cases, and support groups for families recovering from trust betrayal and criminal victimization. Each success story represented healing that extended far beyond legal victories and financial restitution. Mother and father remained in federal prison, their appeal having been denied by higher courts that found no legal basis for overturning their convictions. Patricia visited Mother occasionally, their conversations focused on the slow process of healing from childhood trauma that had shaped decades of criminal behavior. Forgiveness remained a distant goal, but understanding had become possible through professional counseling and honest acknowledgement of the pain that connected them across generations. Jake had entered therapy to address his guilt about 20 years of unwitting complicity in criminal activity, his sessions helping him understand the difference between being manipulated and being responsible. His children's college funds had been rebuilt through legitimate earnings and careful saving their education financed by honest work rather than stolen inheritance. The community's response to our story had been overwhelmingly supportive, with local businesses contributing to the Foundation's mission and neighbors sharing their own experiences with trust betrayal and family manipulation. The media attention had faded, but the relationships built through shared healing continued to strengthen our commitment to preventing similar crimes from destroying other families. On the second anniversary of Grandmother Patricia's return to our lives, we held a celebration dinner in the same dining room where the truth had finally emerged from decades of carefully constructed lies. The table was set with her grandmother's china rescued from storage and restored to its place of honor in our family traditions. As we joined hands to give thanks for the meal and the healing it represented, I looked around at faces that reflected the complex journey from betrayal to justice, from trauma to recovery, from lies to truth. Patricia's eyes sparkled with the satisfaction of someone who'd never given up hope despite impossible circumstances. Jake and Sarah's children chattered excitedly about their latest adventures in cooking and gardening. Marcus squeezed my hand with the quiet strength of someone committed to building something beautiful from the ruins of family destruction. The house on Maple Street had become what Patricia had originally intended: a foundation for authentic family love, a sanctuary for healing from life's inevitable wounds, and a gathering place where truth and justice could flourish under the protection of people who'd learned to value honesty above comfort and healing above hiding. My greatest lesson from this extraordinary journey was discovering that families can be rebuilt stronger than before when they're based on truth rather than convenience, love rather than control, and justice rather than the false peace of avoiding difficult conversations. Sometimes the most painful revelations become the foundation for the most profound healing, and the longest-waited justice becomes the sweetest victory of all. The Victorian house now stands as a symbol of resilience, patience, and the ultimate triumph of love over betrayal. In its rooms, 3 generations of women have learned that home isn't just a place where you live, but a sanctuary where truth is spoken, love is shared, and justice is possible even when it arrives decades after the crimes were committed. As I write these words in the same kitchen where Patricia first opened her briefcase of evidence, I'm reminded that every family story contains both tragedy and triumph, both betrayal and redemption. The choice we make about which elements we nurture determines whether our legacy will be one of healing or harm, truth or deception, love or fear. Have you ever faced a situation where standing up for truth meant risking important relationships? How do you balance family loyalty with personal justice when the two seem impossible to reconcile? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, because I believe sharing our stories helps all of us heal from the wounds that families sometimes inflict and the strength we discover when we choose courage over comfort. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own journey toward justice and healing, please like this video and share it with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for truth in their own family situation. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about finding strength in difficult circumstances and building authentic relationships after betrayal and trauma. Thank you for listening to my story and allowing me to share the painful but ultimately redemptive journey that taught me the difference between family based on blood and family based on love. May we all find the courage to choose truth over comfort, justice over false peace and healing, over hiding from the difficult conversations that lead to genuine transformation. Until next time, remember that your story matters. Your healing is possible and justice may be delayed, but it's never truly denied when we have the patience and courage to wait for truth to emerge from the shadows where it's been hidden.